In May of 1621, the nutmeg trees of the Banda Islands were still producing fruit. But many of the people who had cultivated and traded that fruit were dead, enslaved, deported, or hiding from the soldiers of a European company. The company did not destroy the trees. It needed them. What it wanted to destroy was every other way of buying the spice. The Banda Islands were small, volcanic, and difficult to find on a map. Yet for generations, they had supplied the world with nutmeg and mace. Local growers sold their harvest to Javanese, Malay, Chinese, Arab, and other merchants. The trade was competitive. Prices were negotiated. Ships arrived from different ports. No single power controlled every transaction. The Dutch East India Company wanted to change that. It did not simply want access to nutmeg. It wanted exclusivity. And exclusivity required something the Bandanese had never agreed to. They would have to stop trading with everyone else. When they refused, the company sent soldiers. Today, nutmeg sits in kitchen cabinets for a few dollars. 4 centuries ago, controlling it helped turn merchants into governors, shareholders into imperial partners, and trade routes into battlefields. So how did flavor become a weapon of empire? Open a kitchen cabinet almost anywhere in the English-speaking world, and you will probably find evidence of an old global struggle. Black pepper in a grinder. Cinnamon in a glass jar. Cloves pushed to the back of a shelf. Nutmeg waiting for a holiday recipe. They seem ordinary because the system that delivers them is now ordinary. The packages are small. The prices are usually low. The journey is invisible, but these products come from plants with very particular histories. Black pepper is the dried fruit of a climbing vine associated with the humid landscapes of southern India. True cinnamon comes from the inner bark of trees long associated with Sri Lanka. Cloves are dried flower buds from trees native to islands in eastern Indonesia. Nutmeg and mace come from the same fruit, once found naturally in the Banda Islands. These were not interchangeable powders. They were living species tied to particular climates, soils, skills, and communities. Their value began with geography, but geography alone did not create an empire. For centuries, spices moved through commercial networks, without a single state controlling the entire route. Sailors followed seasonal winds. Farmers cultivated vines and trees. Merchants exchanged spices for cloth, metals, ceramics, grain, and silver. Ports grew rich by connecting regions rather than conquering all of them. Europe did not invent this system. It entered it late. The transformation came when European rulers and companies decided that buying spices was not enough. They wanted to control who could sell them, where ships could sail, and how much scarcity the market would be allowed to see. This is not only the history of flavor, it is the history of a trade network being converted into an armed monopoly. Long before Portuguese ships rounded Africa, the Indian Ocean was already one of the most connected commercial spaces on Earth. It linked the eastern coast of Africa, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, India, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and China. The ocean was not an empty distance waiting for European explorers to cross it. It was a working environment. Sailors understood its currents. Pilots recognized its coastlines. Merchants knew which ports offered pepper, textiles, horses, ceramics, ivory, rice, or aromatics. Most important of all, they understood the monsoon. For part of the year, seasonal winds carried ships toward India. Months later, the wind reversed and helped carry them west again. This knowledge made regular long-distance trade possible. It also meant that commerce followed a rhythm. A ship arriving too late might remain in port for months. A merchant had to understand not only price, but weather, storage, credit, language, and political alliances. Spices passed through this system because they were well suited to long journeys. They were compact. They could be dried. Small quantities could carry high value, but they were rarely the only cargo. A ship carrying pepper might also carry cotton cloth. A trader seeking cloves might bring rice or textiles to the islands that produced them. Silver moved east. Manufactured goods moved between Asian ports. The spice trade was part of a larger exchange system, not a single road running from an Asian forest to a European table. This matters because many popular histories begin with European desire. They begin with Rome wanting pepper, Venice wanting profit, or Portugal wanting a sea route. But every European purchase depended on knowledge, cultivation, and shipping systems built elsewhere. On the Malabar coast of India, pepper vines climbed living supports beneath humid forest canopies. Harvesters picked clusters of berries before they fully ripened. The berries were processed and dried until their skins darkened and wrinkled. In Sri Lanka, skilled workers cut cinnamon stems and separated the inner bark. As the bark dried, it curled into thin quills. In the islands of eastern Indonesia, clove buds had to be harvested before they opened. Nutmeg demanded a different kind of attention. When the fruit ripened, its outer flesh split apart. Inside was a dark seed wrapped in a bright red covering. The seed became nutmeg. The red covering became mace. One fruit created two valuable products. The people who grew these plants were not isolated suppliers waiting to be discovered. The Bandanese, for example, lived in communities that depended on trade. Their islands produced valuable nutmeg, but they needed imported food, cloth, metals, and other goods. Trading with multiple buyers was not a flaw in their system. It was how they protected their independence. Competition among merchants gave growers options. That commercial freedom would later collide with the European demand for monopoly. By the early centuries of the Common Era, Roman merchants were deeply connected to the trade of the Red Sea and India. Ships moved between Egyptian ports and the western coast of India. Pepper, aromatics, gemstones, ivory, and textiles traveled west. Gold and silver traveled east. Archaeologists have found Roman coins in southern India, material evidence of an exchange that connected households thousands of miles apart. For wealthy Romans, pepper offered more than heat. It demonstrated reach. Serving an imported spice showed that a household could command products from beyond the empire. The Roman writer Pliny complained that trade with India drained tens of millions of sesterces from Rome each year. His complaint was partly economic and partly moral. To him, Rome was sending precious metal away for luxuries that seemed unnecessary. But luxury is rarely unnecessary to the people using it to display rank. A peppercorn could communicate status precisely because of the distance behind it. Its value included the farmer's work, the merchant's risk, the shipping season, the number of transactions, the taxes collected at ports, and the social meaning attached to foreign goods. The familiar claim that spices were always worth their weight in gold is too simple. Prices changed across time and place. Pepper was not permanently equal to gold. Not every spice was equally rare, and the price paid near a producing region was nothing like the final price in a distant European city. What mattered was the multiplication of value. At each stage, someone added transport, information, protection, credit, taxation, or profit. By the time a spice arrived at an elite table in Europe, its price represented an entire chain of distance and uncertainty. Spices also carried medical and religious meanings. European physicians inherited traditions that classified foods and medicines according to qualities such as heat, coldness, dryness, and moisture. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg entered prescriptions as well as recipes. They appeared in wine, sauces, perfumes, remedies, and ceremonial preparations. Their medical reputations were often greater than the evidence supporting them, but that did not make the belief economically unimportant. A substance believed to improve digestion, restore balance, or protect the body could command demand far beyond ordinary cooking. One popular myth claims that medieval Europeans needed spices to disguise spoiled meat. That explanation collapses under its own economics. Spices were expensive. People wealthy enough to purchase large quantities of them were generally not forced to eat meat that had already become dangerous. Meat was preserved with salt, drying, smoking, and other established techniques. Spices were used because people enjoyed them, because elite cuisine rewarded complexity, and because imported flavor communicated wealth. The demand was real. The usual explanation for it was simply wrong. The route between Asian producers and European consumers involved many commercial centers. Ports in India and Southeast Asia connected local production to wider markets. Merchants carried goods toward the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. Caravans and coastal shipping moved cargo toward Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean. Venetian merchants then distributed large quantities across Europe. Popular histories often describe everyone between the grower and the European buyer as a useless middleman. But these traders were not merely standing beside a road and increasing the price. They financed voyages. They understood seasonal winds. They arranged storage. They carried goods through multiple currencies and legal systems. They negotiated protection. They absorbed the risk of shipwreck, piracy, crop failure, and war. The system was expensive because the journey was difficult. European rulers did not object to middlemen because middlemen contributed nothing. They objected because someone else was collecting the profit. Venice became one of the great beneficiaries of Mediterranean commerce. Its merchants possessed ships, credit networks, warehouses, political connections, and access to Eastern markets. For rulers outside the Venetian system, the price of spices represented dependence. Portugal faced the Atlantic, far from the commercial advantages of Venice. Its rulers had already begun expanding along the African coast before the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453. The familiar story says that the Ottomans closed the old routes and forced Europe to search for another path. That is misleading. The spice trade did not suddenly stop. Goods continued to reach European markets through Eastern Mediterranean routes. The deeper motive was not simple exclusion. It was the desire to bypass existing networks, capture a greater share of the margin, reach African gold, expand Christian power, and compete with rival kingdoms. Portugal was not searching for a lost connection. It was searching for a more profitable and more controllable one. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached Calicut on the southwestern coast of India. European accounts would later present this as the opening of a new world. For the merchants of Calicut, it was the arrival of another group of foreigners in a port already accustomed to international trade. Da Gama had achieved something important. He had connected Portugal to the Indian Ocean by sailing around Africa, but reaching the market did not mean controlling it. The gifts brought by the Portuguese were unimpressive compared with the luxury goods already circulating in the region. Calicut's merchants dealt in fine textiles, precious metals, spices, and gemstones. European cloth and modest objects did not automatically command respect. Portugal had found the route. It had not yet found a competitive position. That problem shaped what came next. When da Gama returned in 1502, he came with a heavily armed fleet. During the voyage, Portuguese forces intercepted a large merchant vessel carrying several hundred passengers. They seized goods from the ship and burned it. The passengers included merchants and travelers returning from the direction of Mecca. The exact number of victims varies across accounts. The purpose of the violence is less ambiguous. It was meant to terrorize competitors and demonstrate that Portuguese access to the spice trade would be enforced by naval power. This marked a profound change. The Indian Ocean had never been free of violence. Ports fought. Rulers taxed commerce. Piracy existed. Merchants sought protection, but Portugal attempted to impose a new kind of long-distance control. It introduced a naval licensing system. Merchant ships were expected to carry a Portuguese pass known as a cartaz. A ship without one could be seized. Cargo could be confiscated. Ports could be bombarded. The ocean was being treated as a toll road guarded by cannon. Portugal established or captured strategic positions along major routes. Goa became an imperial center on India's western coast. Malacca gave access to the narrow passage, linking the Indian Ocean with Southeast Asian trade. Hormuz stood near the entrance to the Persian Gulf. The goal was not to occupy every coastline. Portugal did not have the people or resources to do that. The strategy was to control choke points, shipping, and high-value cargo. This system was powerful, but never complete. Asian merchants adapted. Some avoided Portuguese patrols. Some negotiated. Some worked with rival states. Some used routes the Portuguese could not consistently police. Local rulers resisted whenever Portuguese demands threatened their own authority. The empire looked solid on a map. At sea, it depended on ships arriving on time, forts being supplied, officials remaining loyal, and distant communities accepting rules they had not created. Portugal had turned trade into armed competition. It had not eliminated the competition. That opportunity would attract another European power, one with a different kind of institution, not only a royal fleet, a company with shareholders. In 1602, the Dutch Republic combined several competing overseas ventures into the Dutch East India Company. Investors contributed capital to an organization designed to operate for the long term. Its shares could be transferred and traded. Its charter allowed it to make treaties, build forts, maintain armed forces, and wage war in the name of commerce. The boundary between company and state became deliberately unclear. In the Netherlands, an investor could own a financial claim on distant voyages. In Asia, company officers could negotiate with rulers or attack them. The same organization connected a share transaction in Amsterdam to a cannon fired in Indonesia. Spices were not the company's only business. Asian textiles, ceramics, tea, coffee, and other commodities would become essential, but control of pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and mace was central to its early ambitions. The Dutch East India Company went beyond purchasing spices from available markets. It tried to determine where production could occur and who was permitted to buy it. That brought the company to Banda. The Banda Islands were the natural home of nutmeg. Their residents had traded with different partners for generations. The Dutch demanded exclusive agreements. From the company's perspective, exclusivity was rational. If competitors could buy nutmeg, they could sell it in Europe. If they could sell it, the Dutch could not set the price. From the Bandanese perspective, exclusive trade threatened survival and independence. The islands depended on imported food and goods. Selling to multiple buyers reduced dependence on any single foreign power. The two systems were incompatible. One was built on negotiated competition. The other was built on monopoly. The company's Governor-General, Jan Pieter Zoon Koen, believed force could resolve the contradiction. In 1621, Dutch forces launched a campaign across the islands. Villages were attacked. Leaders were executed. People were killed, expelled, enslaved, or transported elsewhere. The population that had organized the nutmeg economy was devastated. The word genocide is used by many historians and institutions to describe the scale and intent of the destruction. Whatever terminology is chosen, the result was unmistakable. A trading society was broken so that a company could restructure production. The Dutch East India Company divided valuable land into plantations managed under colonial supervision. Enslaved laborers were brought from other parts of Asia and forced to work in the nutmeg economy. Forts guarded the islands. Production was monitored. Trade outside company channels was forbidden. This was not simply a market victory. It was the construction of a corporate colony. The company also tried to control cloves. Trees in approved production zones were protected. Trees outside those zones could be cut down. The policy was designed to prevent uncontrolled supply. If too many cloves reached the market, prices might fall. Scarcity was no longer only a product of nature, it became an administrative decision. A tree could be destroyed because it grew in the wrong place. A harvest could be restricted because abundance threatened shareholders. A community could lose access to a crop it had cultivated because the company claimed an exclusive right to global trade. This is the point at which the history of spices becomes more than a story of valuable goods. It becomes a story about institutions learning to govern through commerce. The company measured land, issued instructions, maintained records, moved labor, punished unauthorized exchange, protected approved producers, destroyed alternatives. The product remained a seed. The power around it became bureaucratic. The Dutch East India Company also became part of a developing financial culture in Amsterdam. Its long-term capital and transferable shares helped expand organized securities trading. This does not mean that every feature of modern capitalism was invented for nutmeg. Banks, partnerships, insurance, credit, and shared investment all had longer histories, but the company demonstrated a powerful combination: large pools of private capital, government privileges, tradable claims, permanent administration, military force, and profits expected from distant territories. The spice trade did not create modern finance by itself. It helped show how finance could be connected to empire. One famous story claims that the Dutch later exchanged Manhattan for the nutmeg island of Run. The reality is more complicated. The Treaty of Breda in 1667 settled a much wider war and confirmed several territories that each side already controlled. England retained New Netherland, including New Amsterdam. The Dutch retained Run and other possessions. It was not a simple real estate trade between two islands, but the simplified story survived for a reason. It captures how differently 17th-century governments valued the world. A small island covered in a controlled commodity could appear more strategically useful than a distant settlement, whose future was still uncertain. What looks absurd now made sense inside an economy built on monopoly. A geographic monopoly contains its own weakness. If a plant grows in only one place, controlling that place can create enormous power, but it also gives every competitor a reason to move the plant. European empires became increasingly interested in economic botany. They collected seeds, recorded soils, compared climates, established botanical gardens. Plants became strategic assets. The same empires that guarded spice, producing islands, also created the scientific and shipping networks that could break geographic scarcity. In the 18th century, the French botanist Pierre Poivre became associated with efforts to obtain spice plants from Dutch-controlled regions. Clove and nutmeg plants were carried to French colonies in the Indian Ocean. Not every attempt succeeded. Seeds died. Young trees failed. Officials competed and interfered, but enough plants survived to prove that Dutch-controlled islands were not the only possible production zones. Cloves later became strongly associated with Zanzibar. Nutmeg spread to new locations, including the Caribbean. Pepper cultivation expanded beyond its earlier centers. Once spices could be cultivated across several colonies, no single island could guarantee monopoly prices. The collapse was gradual. The Dutch East India Company continued trading in many commodities. The English East India Company also moved far beyond its early interest in spices. Indian textiles became central. Later, taxation, territorial control, military power, tea and opium transformed the company into something much larger and more destructive than its founders had imagined. This was another legacy of the spice trade. A company created to reach Asian goods could become a territorial government. The skills were transferable. Financing ships could lead to maintaining forts. Maintaining forts could lead to hiring soldiers. Protecting trade could become collecting taxes. Collecting taxes could become ruling millions of people. The commodity changed. The institution remained. By the late 18th century, the Dutch East India Company was burdened by debt, corruption, war, and administrative costs. It was dissolved in 1799. Its territories and obligations passed to the Dutch state. The company disappeared. The colonial structures it helped build did not. Modern spice shelves create the impression that the old problem has been solved. Supply is abundant. Brands compete. Consumers can choose between whole peppercorns, ground cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, cardamom, cumin, turmeric, and dozens of blends. The spices that once crossed the ocean in guarded cargoes can now be delivered with a few taps on a screen. But low retail prices do not necessarily mean that power is evenly distributed. A large share of spice cultivation is still carried out by small-scale farmers. They face weather, crop disease, price changes, and the cost of meeting export standards. The final product may pass through collectors, processors, grinders, exporters, importers, and retailers before reaching a consumer. The jar is transparent. The chain behind it often is not. Modern risk no longer looks exactly like a Portuguese warship or a Dutch fort. It may appear as unstable farm income, a buyer changing suppliers without warning, a crop damaged by extreme weather, poor storage allowing mold and toxins to develop, an origin label that tells the consumer very little about who was paid. Labor abuse has not disappeared from all spice-related supply chains. Official labor investigations continue to identify child labor risks in commodities, such as vanilla from Madagascar and Uganda. That does not mean every product from those countries is produced under abusive conditions. It means traceability matters. The hidden cost of a modern spice is not automatically the same as the hidden cost of a colonial monopoly, but the old structural question remains recognizable. Who carries the risk? Who has the information? Who can refuse a price? Who can switch suppliers? And who controls access to the final customer? The language has changed. The distance has not. The next time you turn a pepper grinder, look closely at what falls onto the plate. A small, wrinkled fruit. Easy to store. Easy to ignore. Behind it is a history of monsoon sailing, Indian ports, Mediterranean finance, Portuguese cannon, Dutch shareholders, enslaved labor, botanical espionage, and modern supply chains. Spices did not make people violent simply because they tasted good. They became instruments of power because powerful institutions learned to control distance, scarcity, and access. The conquest did not create the value of spices. It inherited that value, then redirected it. Today, the product has become ordinary. The consequences have not entirely disappeared. This is everyday empires. Ordinary things. Extraordinary consequences. Which everyday object should we investigate next? And what history do you think its label is leaving out? Subscribe for more hidden histories behind the things we use every day.